Buckeyes Now on Sports Illustrated. I'm Brendan Gulick along with Brett Hiltbrand chatting about the beginning of spring ball. Kind of hard to believe that spring practice is here, but on Friday, March 19th, the Buckeyes will begin with their first of 15 practices over a 5-week stretch. It will conclude with a spring game on April 17th, scheduled down at Ohio Stadium. The season is only 2 months in the rearview mirror, and thankfully, after 7 full weeks off, the Buckeyes had their winter workouts and now are ready to take the practice field again with actually a very full-looking roster because of the guys that both returned, perhaps somewhat unexpectedly, and with a boatload of the incoming freshman class having early enrolled. So Brett and I are going to chat a little bit here about some of the things we want to see out of spring practice, priorities maybe for the Buckeyes, and recognizing that not all things are going to be learned and finalized here over the next 5 weeks. But Brett, I don't want to just beat the quarterback battle to death because I think it's the most important storyline.
Well, we're absolutely going.
We're at least going to start there. But there are a number of other things too that I think should be a lot of fun to pay attention to. So why don't we start with the quarterback battle, use that as our jumping off point. Right now, CJ Stroud, Jack Miller, and Kyle McCord are all going to get a bunch of reps. Ryan Day said in his press conference yesterday that because the roster is so big, they actually think that all 3 of those guys are going to get a boatload of opportunities because they can maybe even split up into 3 groups. And he is committed to, keeping his cards close to the vest, I guess, as best he can. And frankly, they all need to work. So it should be fun to see how this goes over the spring.
Right. I think you're going to see, if you're repping with the ones, right, like if you're an offensive lineman in the ones, you're going to have 3 different guys back there routinely cycling in and out of practice. I would guess that the real separation will come in 7-on-7s in the summer when they kind of get together, on their own. But I mean, we haven't had a quarterback battle like this since the battle to replace Terrell Pryor, probably. I mean, you could make the argument that the 2015 JT Barrett, Cardell Jones, which resulted in, the world's worst quarterback by committee stretch of Ohio State football that we'd seen for a while. The Dwayne Haskins, Joe Burrow QB battle was similar. But this one feels different because this is the guy who wins this job is the face of the program for presumably 2 full seasons. And that's what makes
maybe 3.
Maybe 3, right. So that's what makes, I think, this quarterback battle so different. And when you factor in the current landscape of college football and that with the transfer portal and how that is a massive influence in this, because sometimes, as we've seen in the past, guys who don't win the job will leave, that you have to be very, very sure that the guy who wins is the guy for you. And that's what I think makes this so intriguing. And between now and when we kick it off in the fall, it's going to be something that if you are within the Ohio State football bubble, and I assume if you're watching this, you're someone who consumes this at a large rate, this is going to dominate your feed over the next several months because it is a quarterback battle unlike something that we've seen in quite some time. And it's absolutely of the utmost importance in a lot of ways for Ohio State now and into the future.
Well, look, CJ Stroud and Jack Miller are the 2 returners, but neither one of them really had any valuable playing time or snaps last year. The second half of games didn't probably go the way the Buckeyes wanted to, or they maybe could have gotten those guys more live game reps. And because exactly 12 months ago, spring practice was shut down. Obviously, camp was truncated. There was no, preseason or non-conference games to really get going. So, both Stroud and Miller, and now with the insertion of true freshman quarterback Kyle McCord, who I think can really spin it. All 3 of those guys are in a lot of ways standing on the same level. And it's even beyond the quarterbacks, right? I mean, the entire rising second-year players, all of the whether they redshirted or not, and are they freshmen or sophomores, the guys that were here last year for their first year didn't have this period of time to work last year, which I think makes spring ball this year that much more important, because there are some extremely valuable reps and practice time that these guys are going to get across the board. Ohio State had a lot of veteran leadership that helped, guide it through the choppy waters last year. Now a huge chunk of this team is going to have a lack of experience. And I think that puts that much more emphasis on having a quarterback in particular who can be a leader, because they need leadership this year for sure.
I think they need it, especially on that side of the football too, because if we're talking about a quarterback battle unlike one we've seen. I think the next most interesting position group battle for playing spots is running back, and how deep that group is. And so the leadership in a lot of ways, it'll feel a little bit like I think the year where we had Terry McLaurin, Paris Campbell, in even KJ Hill to a certain extent, that season where the leadership is actually coming from the wide receivers, because you have some veteran presence there. In Chris Olave, the tight ends are also guys who have played a ton of snaps. But I totally agree that one of the attributes that I think that you're going to have to see, I think if you're Ryan Day, the coaching staff, with whoever wins the quarterback job, is not just the guy who plays best, but also is the one who emerges, I think, is kind of the go-to leader in a lot of ways for those crucial situations, because that's just what that position requires out of people who play it. And I think it's especially that case in college football, maybe even more so than the NFL. And so I think that's maybe the most fascinating part of the job in this competition for me, is to see the personality of kind of those three guys that were kind of maybe nudging to the front of the line here a little bit, in that who really is the guy that the other players on offense look to in pressure situations, and that's something that you'll see recreated from in practice a lot. They'll really try and heap a ton of pressure on those guys, and the one who handles that the best is probably going to be the one who comes out with the starting job.
I don't want to regurgitate everything that Ryan Day said yesterday, so I'd encourage you to go on our YouTube channel or on BuckeyesNow.com and check out, if you're interested in some of the things he said about the quarterbacks. He gave a couple of really thorough, in-depth answers about what he's looking for. The thing that stood out most to me, other than he wants somebody that's a good leader, is that he wants somebody that knows the answers to the test before the test, with the idea that in a meeting room, you can't go over every possible situation, but you need to have somebody running the offense that is so committed to understanding and learning and knowing and anticipating what the offense needs, that when something comes up that they haven't gone over or haven't practiced, that they can handle that kind of situation. So we'll find out. Is CJ or Jack or Kyle the guy? It's way too early to tell, but this unofficially kicks off the idea of figuring out who's going to be the new quarterback. There are several other position battles that are really important. Certainly don't want to look past the offensive line. Losing Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis is really important, but the Buckeyes are bringing three really good linemen back, and they've got some good depth there. I want to move to the defensive side of the ball, because they lose four linebackers, and who's going to play linebacker this year? I mean, we certainly know who the next guys are up on the roster depth chart, but could somebody unforeseen come in and play some linebacker? I think that's a huge area that they need to start addressing, and that will start this week.
Yeah, and I think in on that side of the football, as far as the position groups are concerned, a linebacker is by far the biggest question mark, and I also think it's the most important one, because of what we've seen the last, say, 4 to 5 years, with some of the consistency there in Tuck Borland, Pete Warner, Baron Browning. Now all of a sudden you're going to have some new faces there across the board, and that I think it's also it's like a sneaky linebacker is such a sneaky important like role in the team, not just on defense, because those guys are such huge tone setters in games, because they are the ones who are making the majority of the tackles, but they're also the ones who are divvying up defensive quadrants for and then gap contain on defense. And when those break down, those are huge plays. Those are touchdowns for the offense, for your opponent. And so when you do all of those things right, it has a tendency to settle games down on that side of the football. And I think that's such an understated and underappreciated skill set for linebackers, because if they mess that up even once, it's a touchdown. You're watching heels going in the end zone. And so for these new guys that come in, and we've seen this a couple different times throughout Ohio State history, when you have one batch of Ohio State linebackers who have played a ton of snaps, when they leave and a new group comes in, that we've seen in the past in times of some growing pains specific to big plays. And I think that's something that the guys who emerge in this job, that'll probably more so than fundamentals, more so than some of those intangible things. It's just like, can you line up right, and can you get gap contain right, and that'll be probably job number one. And I would guess that the defense this year, probably for the first 4 or 5 games of the year, will be really, really simple for Ohio State, until there's a lot of things on tape that they start to have to really, really game plan and kind of specifically X and O for. But the linebacker group is by far the most important position battle competition that we have this spring and summer.
Well, and the secondary, last year obviously had some really good moments, but the really tough moments are the ones that stick out. And unfortunately, there were a good number of those. I think we at least have to bring up the fact that Marcus Hooker has a second issue. He was hit with a DUI during his freshman year, and is being charged with an OVI here just this past weekend. And it sounds like he has a court appearance on Friday morning. He is suspended indefinitely, and I don't know if we're going to see him play with Ohio State again. There were times where it might have felt like Ohio State was moving on from him, or moving into a situation where he was going to play less anyways. The good news is Ohio State thinks they've got a mostly healthy roster going into spring ball. I think Cam Brown and Court Williams are going to start to see a little bit more time. They're going to factor in certainly Marcus Williamson as well. Mm-hmm. Ryan Day was quick to say that he thought Josh Proctor had some good moments this past year, and I think he's going to be part of the plans. And obviously they've got some talented corners that are coming in, and Seven Banks is back. So maybe potentially losing Marcus Hooker isn't the end of the world for the total roster, but it's a story right now that's obviously not a good one. And Ryan Day was pretty quick to say yesterday they weren't happy with what happened.
Yeah, that is by far the position group that has the most room for improvement on the defensive side of the football. And I would say even more specifically, I think they can get better at safety. Josh Proctor is probably the big reason why. I kind of feel like, going back to what I said earlier, I think in some ways the simplicity that you're going to see to help linebackers is actually going to help the secondary and the back end, because I felt at times last year they got really complicated. And I've said here in the past that I would not want to play DB in modern college football now, because the speed at which you're making decisions, you take one one step wrong and you're getting beat for a touchdown. Like it's that fast now. And it hasn't always been like that. And so, and I think in safety and DB in general, it's made especially bad because you can be made a lot more silly. You can be made to look a lot more silly than other positions if you take one or two really bad steps. Like how often have we seen, safeties taking leaning and taking one step forward, peeking into the backfield, and then getting beat for a stupid easy touchdown over the top. Trevor Lawrence made a living on that at Clemson, right? Like that is, if you take a bad step on the defensive line, you're just getting pushed out and the next play happens and no one notices. But everyone notices when the safety or defensive back messes up, because more often than not, it results in a big play. But I think the more simple it is for Ohio State safeties, I think the better the better the opportunity for them to play well. And I think a lot of these guys, and I think Josh Proctor is a good example. A lot of these guys are football players, right? And this is such a cliche, but I'm going to lean into it. That I think at some point, and I think this is something that Kerry Combs does well. I think there have been other guys in the past. Jeff Hafley did this better than anyone that I've seen in a long time. But there have been other guys who, on the defensive coaching staff in years past that maybe have not done this super well. That you can get so technical and bogged down into technique and film study and do your job and all of this, that you can sometimes lose track of the innate instinctual play that playing defense in college football and football in general requires. And a lot of times it's just see ball, hunt ball. And I think that this Ohio State coaching staff is primed to really put these guys in a good position because of what they need to do with some inexperience at linebacker. That I think you're going to see a big jump in defensive back play because certain things are going to be simpler. And a lot of these guys are just literally going out and being football players. And I think that'll aid them in a big and huge way going forward, certainly in the first third of the season. I think if you're watching this, if you're thinking about, or you're watching the season, think about what we're talking about right now in the terms of what you're going to see in those first 4 to 5 games, because I think that's where you'll see the biggest improvement.
So Ryan Day has also been pretty straightforward in saying that he kind of views, spring practice number 16 as the first day of preseason camp.
Right.
And that, he's probably not going to make a decision on anything super hard and fast unless he really has to. But he wants to keep the competition open, right? And I don't just mean quarterback, across the board. That's part of the recruiting pitch to come play at Ohio State. If you as a 4 or 5 star player, if that's what you were, recruited as, if you're not willing to come into a situation where you're going to compete against other guys that are just as highly recruited and just as talented as you, then maybe Ohio State isn't the place for you. And I think Ryan Day and his staff do a really, really good job of fostering that competition. And frankly, a rising tide helps all boats. And so the Buckeyes are hoping they can find the perfect group to be out there for September. I guess it's September 2nd, a Thursday night against Minnesota in the opener, and then against Oregon in the home opener the following weekend. We've got a ton that we could get to along the way. Maybe we'll save some of it for subsequent weeks of spring practice. But let's wrap with one final thought of anything that you really think Ohio State has to have some kind of an answer on before spring practice wraps up. Is there one particular position battle, one player, one thing that just can't go much longer without having an answer?
I would love to see them settle on a running back or two, right? Like Jim Tressel always used to, the running joke was you needed a pair and a spare when it comes to running backs. I would love to see them have a very clear delineation of the depth chart there, because you have some questions, guys coming off of injury. You had with Crowley, you had some ball security issues towards the end of the year. You saw flashes from guys like Mayan Williams. I would love to see who your go-to guy is, who's your third down back, and then who's kind of your spare, your spare there. Because I think that helps the quarterback going forward. That knowing that you don't necessarily have to go out, 5, 6, 7 times a game and get a first down on 3rd and 7. If you're being positive with the running back on 1st and 2nd down, that helps the quarterback going forward. So I would say figure out and find your running back in spring ball for sure.
The Buckeyes start spring practice on Friday. We are expecting on Friday to hear from offensive coordinator Kevin Wilson and defensive coordinator Kerry Combs, as well as 2 veteran players. Those are Thayer Munford. Not a great surprise that he has been hailed for his leadership. Ryan Day spoke of him quite a bit. Perhaps a little bit of a surprise, but a pleasant one. Zach Harrison has gotten quite a bit of praise from Coach Day yesterday as well. We'll hear from Thayer and Zach as spring practice opens on Friday as well. The Buckeyes are finally back on the field after basically 2 months worth of time of decompression after the frustrating national championship loss, and now the team is trying to retool itself and figure out what the 2021 version is going to look like. We are certainly going to cover it as best we can along the way right here on Buckeyes Now. Hope to see you again real soon. Thank you.